So how can we use DTK in order to replicate a paper? And so what I have here is U.S. hospitals' administrative expenses increased sharply during COVID-19. Um, this particular paper is originally done by Yang Wang and Ji Bai, as well as Jared Anderson. And so what I did here is I went and found the variable definitions. You can read through the paper, but there's also some supplemental information here that gives us a file to the appendix. And so at the end of the paper, we find the appendix information. And I got that pulled up already here at this supplementary file. And so here's the appendix. And so appendix table 1 explains all the different variables we need. For example, what's used in the paper is clinical expenses as well as administrative expenses. How is that defined? And mixed clinical and administrative expenses. And so the question then is, how do we get those variables? With DTK, this is super easy. Let me show you. And so here we are in DTK. We got our cost reports, all cost reports since 2011 loaded in here, and it's updated on a regular basis. And so what we would do here is we would go to select fields, worksheet fields, and we could filter for our variables here. So for example, we could say that all these variables are coming from worksheet A. We could find that. And so what we're generally looking for here is the total. So in the column label or column code is the 300, and so here total would be in the column label. That's what I'm going to filter for. So add column label contains, well, let's do starts with total. And so here we got the different variables that are used in the Ji Bai paper. And so I can scroll over here. And so for example, we see here laundry, linen service, housekeeping, and that's what we see right here. Laundry, linen, housekeeping, dietary, cafeteria, and that kind of stuff. And I already got those selected. It's a lot of variables. It would take a long time. And so I got those variables selected over here in order of the appendix 1, as well as some additional variables. And so what we can do then is go over here to view data. We see our hospitals, the state, all the hospital characteristics, geographical information, whether they're government or a nonprofit or for-profit, and all the different variables. A lot of them. At the moment, I think it's about 83. And so what we could do next then is either save this query for later to continue working on it, export. I've already done this, and so I've exported the query. And it'll give me data something like this. Here in this data, I've now classified. I have now classified the variables according to the instructions here. So for example, the sum of all these variables here is the clinical data, and then the next category was the administrative data, and I got that summarized, as well as the mixed costs, the mixed expenses that I got here. So all the variables that I pulled didn't take long. Then I added in some urban rural indicator. Here's the original data. In the database, it's coded as 1.2. I've named it as urban rural with a if function, relatively straightforward. And then I also pulled the total expenses from worksheet A so that we can get a percentage. And so then next step, relatively simple, I did a pivot table where we can adjust this pivot table any way we want to. And so what I have here for now is by year, by rural and urban. And so I have all my clinical expenses by year, rural and urban, my administrative expenses by rural and urban, and my mixed expenses. And also have that in total, clinical, administrative, and mixed. And so what I did then, I used those numbers used those same numbers, calculated a percentage change to see if we have an increase or not, a particular change. And so what I see here, for example, is that the percentage change for clinical expenses looked something like this over time, where we had a big bump, big increases in and around 2016. That was probably ACA related, the Affordable Care Act, and then went down a little bit, but still stayed significantly higher than where it used to be before. Similarly, for the administrative expenses, the percentage change over time went up and then stagnated a little bit as a percentage increase, probably of around 20% or so that we see here still. Whereas before we used to have increases that are very flat, very minimal, almost inflation type increases. Whereas in 2016, boom, a massive increase, and then continued increases over time. But those increases have gotten a little less over time, sort of like a government budget. And then here we got mixed expenses, similar idea, so we see the same across the board. And then what I did in addition was a percentage change expenses for clinical and admin, and mixed to see the percentage change. And we can see here that total clinical expenses, the percentage changes went up quite a bit. Administrative expenses did as well, but that has slowed. Also, what I did here in terms of numbers, I also pulled what about total clinical expense percent of total expenses, clinical expenses of total expense, and we see here that this is fairly consistent right now. Now these are all numbers that are not adjusted for anything, and this is just a quick Excel export, and so there's a bunch of more adjustments in there that this paper had in there that I haven't done yet. And then we have here the total administrative expenses percent of change, also fairly consistent. The total administrative expenses percent of total expenses, fairly consistent, maybe slightly moving up around here, but really not. I haven't done a significance test or anything like that, but certainly not looking very large.